Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Supradeep Das, and I am a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies, I welcome you all to today's Wednesday seminar, Line of Riparian Control, China, India, and the Brahmaputra River Basin. I am delighted to welcome you to today's Wednesday seminar. Today's seminar will examine how large dams and embankments, often framed as tools of development and national security, function as extensions of state power and bordering practices on transboundary rivers. Focusing on the Brahmaputra River Basin, it highlights how China and India's mega hydropower projects act as markers of sovereignty and national pride, while also producing ecological ruptures, political tensions, and economic inequalities across riparian communities. By treating rivers as entities to be engineered and controlled, such interventions create long term environmental vulnerabilities and reshape regional geopolitics, particularly in the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. The speaker for today's seminar is Dr. Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman, who is a visiting associate fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. His research interests include transboundary Himalayan ecology, bioregionalism or ecoregionalism, politics of development infrastructures, migration, borderland communities, and transboundary water sharing and management issues between India, China, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. The chair for today's seminar is Professor Nimmi Korean. She is a professor at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi. She is also a member of the External Advisory Board of the India-China Institute, the New School, New York. Her research focuses on Asian borderlands and looks specifically at the intersections between capital and ecology, federalism and foreign policy, resources and rights. Professor Kurian has written and published widely on alternative spatial imaginations, a theme that is explored in her two books, India China Borderlands Conversation Beyond the Center, published by SAGE in 2014, and India and China Rethinking Borders and Security, co authored and published by University of Michigan Press in 2016. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to request all the participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. All the participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box with your name and affiliation, or else you can also use your raise your hand option in the Zoom during the interactive session in the seminar. You shall then be called upon and unmute yourself and ask your question. I now hand over to the chair. Over to you, Professor Kurian. Thank you.
Thank you, Supradeep, and a very good afternoon to all of you. And thank you for joining us today for the ICS Wednesday seminar. I'd like to begin by thanking ICS for convening this talk today. I cannot think of a more relevant time to be having this conversation. Let me also, on behalf of all of us, extend a warm welcome to our speaker today, Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman, who will be speaking to us on this very evocative title, Mirza, titled Line of Riparian Control, China, India, and the Brahmaputra River Basin. So I think to get us started, let me flag what I think are a couple of problematic readings that I see when I look at the discourse and the way it's been framed. And I think this could speak to some of the themes that Mirza is likely to touch upon in his presentation. So I think the first thing that stood out for me when I look at this, the mainstream framing, is that it is in many ways a one-eyed narrative. And the reason I say this is because it's very skewed and very selective. And so what does this narrative tell us? It tells us that in this particular context of this theme that Mirza is going to speak to us, it tells us that due to the absence of intergovernmental treaties or weak institutionalism, the Himalayan region is becoming what is being called as, quote unquote, a treacherous new battleground. So, and how this particular, factor has led to hinders the sustainable management of resources in the region. But what it doesn't, and this is what it doesn't tell us, is that it is the very same unsustainable exploitation of resources or the extractive imaginaries at play that has triggered the environmental degradation that we see across the Himalayas in the first place. The second, what I see is a new bordering or rebordering at work. And this is a theme that Mirza will also be speaking to us about. And we see the borderlands, especially the Northeast borderlands, being reimagined as quote unquote last frontiers, as if they are the very final places of possibility. So there is this very conscious framing or reframing of the borderlands. And the Northeast, as we all know, is being projected or gets reimagined as the national powerhouse. And it brings with it a set of notions. There is, for instance, the feel-good narrative about greening South Asia across, and you see this uncannily very similar discourse being played out across the region. It also brings with it a discursive sort of reframing of capital and ecology. A very quick example, just to illustrate what what I'm getting at here, is that we are also seeing a collusion between, and it's a very ominous collusion between conservation and extraction. And you actually see some of the biggest conservation organizations, such as the Conservation International or the IUCN, for instance, sanguinely portray partnerships with extractive industry firms as in very feel-good emancipatory terms, and call this as beneficial to attain net positive impact on biodiversity. And what it also does is, for instance, technical interventions such as the PES, the payment for ecosystem services, all privilege what one can call, or what is called as benefit distribution over representation and rights over resources. So there is this, again, what they don't tell us is that these wide-ranging social, spatial, economic transformations are producing a new set of borders, which the political scientist William Callahan alerts us about. They are going to produce, and they are producing, new centers and new peripheries. And so just to borrow from Mirza's evocative title, these are, I think, creating new lines of exclusions and inequalities. I think this is the perfect cue for me to stop and hand over the mic to Mirza and request him to give us his presentation. Over to you, Mirza.
Thank you so much, Mimi. You make my work easier by setting the context. Thank you, Institute of Chinese Studies, for arranging this Wednesday seminar on this topic. And I'm glad to be here after a long time. I wanted to actually bring about the thoughts that also in terms of how Mimi has put it across. I'd just like to share my screen and show some pictures as I speak. Yeah, so can you see the screen, or
no,
I can't see it.
It's blank.
Okay.
We saw it momentarily. We saw the title.
Yeah, just a minute. I'll again try. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so basically, the title of my presentation today is Line of Riparian Control, and it borrows from the line of actual control, which we know the India-China a border to be referred to as. And why I put this in a sense is that the very close intertwining of the border dispute between India and China, and how transboundary rivers have actually come into the discourse in a very centered manner in the bilateral discourse, and also in the public imagination as well. Both countries have elaborate plans of controlling nature along the line of actual control. And in terms of the Himalayas, the transboundary rivers that shapes the Himalaya, has shaped the Himalaya, also control over those rivers is critical to actually put in this control. The control mindset is very important in this context, because nature, as the Himalayan, the local communities inhabiting the Himalayas do not have a different worldview from what New Delhi and Beijing has in terms of along these borderlands. So the control over rivers becomes very important in the context of what Nimi also said just earlier, that we are actually making new borders, and the borders could be something as imaginary as the line of actual control, but the borders could also be the large hydropower dams that are being planned by China and India on the stretches of the river. This picture that you see here is taken from Anjao district in Arunachal Pradesh, and the top, the snow line that you see is actually the line of actual control. And beyond this snow line originates the Lohit River, or the Jayul River that is known in Tibet. So the Lohit River flows through this terrain and becomes the Lohit in Arunachal Pradesh, and then in Sadia joins the Brahmaputra to become the Brahmaputra River. And that's considered to be, in Assamese folklore, is considered to be the source of the Brahmaputra River, and after which the Dibang joins, and the Siang joins, and Subansiri joins, and many other tributaries join on the northern side. A dam that was built on the Jayul River, 90 kilometers upstream of this point where I'm talking about, was completed in 2016. It's a smaller dam, but it also has affected flow on the Lohit River. The point that I'm trying to make here is that there are many such transboundary rivers where dams are being built by China and also by India, but they are not talked about as much as the dams on the Siang or the Yalong Sangpo on the mainstream. Cumulatively, a lot of changes actually have come into flow patterns by also these small dams, and the cumulative impact across the Himalayas by all of these big dams is actually the important thing to note here, and not only focus, the national media's focus, both in China and India, is on the biggest dam, basically. The biggest dam in the world that is being planned by China at Medoc County at a staggering 60 gigawatt of energy that it will produce, and the imagery of how it has been projected in Indian media as entire northeast of India living in the shadow of that 60 gigawatt dam. And also downstream, 90 kilometers downstream of the Yalong Sangpo Gorge is the Siang Upper multi-purpose hydroelectric project. The Siang Upper Dam is at 11,000 megawatts and is one of the largest in the country. And when it is going to be completed, but the point is that a dam for a dam is actually being across the posturing that is happening between India and China is actually in the nature of a dam for a dam. And what the argument that I want to make is the dam for a dam approach across the Himalayas will actually make the Himalayas suffer, and the communities living, the many innumerable small communities that live across the Himalayas will suffer. In that sense, the dams that are being planned in this stretch are just within about 300 kilometer stretch. A number of dams are being planned, and it is also known as the kind of energy powerhouse of the country. We always know, and this is just a picture of the from Google Earth, taken of the Brahmaputra Basin, coming into Assam and then flowing into the Bangladesh, forming the Sundarbans, in a sense. And also there is this narrative of how we can control rivers, but also we can discipline rivers. The rivers which have taken a great U-turn at the Great Bend, which is actually flowing from west to east. All rivers flows from west to east, and this is one river that actually takes a very rogue turn, U-turn, and then flows into India. And there is this kind of kind of an intention in the Medoc Dam also, that to actually see if we can discipline a kind of a rogue river. So, but a lot of this narrative is also limited between China and India. The other riparian countries of Bhutan and Bangladesh is often lost in this kind of narrative. And recently, we also have seen Bangladesh clearly bandwagoning with China on this issue by asking for a 50-year comprehensive river management plan to China when Mohammad Yunus had visited earlier this year to China. And that also has sparked concerns in India, which is a middle riparian country in the context of the Brahmaputra River Basin. And being a middle riparian country in the Brahmaputra River Basin, it has a very excellent position, a riparian position, to take a riparian leadership position as well. To actually not try to mirror China as much, but also try to also see through technology and also through sustained research, as Bangladesh have done over the years, to also see how it can actually play a more responsible riparian kind of a role in the overall basin and set a precedent for riparian decision making in the larger region, so to say. Arunachal Pradesh is also known as the land of the rising sun, and now increasingly being seen as the land of rising hydropower. And Arunachal Pradesh actually, this dam building spree is nothing new. That has actually come only the end of last year, or with the 14th five-year plan of the, as it has been discussed in such a big manner, with the Medoc Dam being announced in the 14th five-year plan of the Chinese Communist Party. But it has a long history. China has been putting this Medoc Dam on the drawing boards for many years, and have conducted systematic research on the river basin, and several scientific papers have been published on these. And over the years, this has been deployed on and off, sparking concerns in downstream India and Bangladesh, and also in Bhutan. But now it has actually started work on the ground. Money has been allocated, resources have been allocated, and all of that. So it has actually been, but from the earlier times, from 2008 onwards, not many different dams have been also planned in Arunachal Pradesh, but has been also in a way deployed in many ways. And when I was actually talking about the line of actual control, it also demonstrates here as actually these dams, the hydropower concrete dams, have a bordering effect by themselves, which may be away from the borderline, but also nevertheless have a bordering effect. So these big dams, such as 11,000 megawatt big dams and the 66 gigawatt big dams, have a bordering effect by themselves, and are also very, very important sovereignty markers for both China and India, being in frontier regions such as Tibet and in northeast of India. A lot of the state-making projects that both China and India are doing is part of that project, and in a way kind of these hydropower dams becomes important national symbols and also very, very important sovereignty markers. And it needs to be actually built in order to claim, put a legitimate claim over territory. So in that sense, these are also important national projects, projects of national importance, and which also brings in the aspect of how local communities have opposed these dams and have been sustaining this kind of a protest over time. There was a time when in 2008, when all of these dams were announced, there was a huge protest in different parts of Arunachal Pradesh. Local protests, local community protesting against these big dams, especially in the Tawang district, also in Dibang Valley, in Subansiri Valley, Siang, and also in Dibang. A lot of these projects have stuttered on and off and have not really taken. The only dam of repute now in Arunachal Pradesh currently operating is only a 405 megawatt dam, which is the Ranganadi Dam, and a 600 megawatt dam, which is the in the Kameng district. So these are the only combined strength of only about 1,000 megawatt in all in Arunachal Pradesh, which is also projected as the national powerhouse of the country. But a lot of the half-built and even the Siang Upper Dam is now at a pre-feasibility stage only. Nothing has been built, has been being portrayed in the media. A lot of these pictures, AI-generated pictures, have been doing the rounds, where AI-generated pictures of the Medoc Dam also are doing the rounds, and all of that, without fully understanding the nature of how these dams will mean to the very fragile geography of this region, and how interconnected this region is. Because when I speak about these Himalayas, it is not only a kind of a region which is compartmentalized into China, India, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, but this entire river basin is a bioregion and an ecoregion. And this bioregional and ecoregional perspective predates the nation-state formation in these regions, and hence cannot these kind of building of infrastructure, large infrastructure, hydropower infrastructure, cannot be seen only within the nation-state box. It has been done within the nation-state box, but also as a power projection, but cannot be only, but in a very interconnected manner, we have to see that. Researchers such as Ruth Gamble and others have actually pointed out that the Medoc Dam is not as big in terms of construction as it is being portrayed or thought to be. The generation of 60 gigawatt is going to be there, but how it is going to be there, it may not require a large concrete gravity dam as it is being imagined in popular media. It also, Ruth Gamble also in her article talks about how a two-stage kind of a tunneling process, two smaller dams, and how the gradient, the natural gradient of the Yalong Sangpo growers is going to be used to actually produce that electricity that is being projected from this dam project. While at the base of this Yalong Sangpo gorge, where the Siang Upper multipurpose project is being planned, is also termed to be a very bad place to actually do the dam. Because the very fact by which we are actually opposing the Chinese dam on the basis of sediment retention, a huge amount of sediment that actually comes into the Brahmaputra Basin and sustains the Brahmaputra floodplains in northeast of India and in Bangladesh, the Jamuna floodplains in Bangladesh, are because of the sediment that comes from the Yalong Sangpo Gorge. And almost more than half of it actually comes from there. And the sediment retention is one of the major factors that India is opposing, that a big dam at a great band will actually prevent that from happening. But the same effect will actually, the Siang Upper Dam will also do. And that again is a concern because there also needs to be that, India needs to be seen doing something in response to the Chinese dam. And to my understanding, this kind of, posturing across the line of actual control, this kind of riparian control dams are actually a product of this kind of a signaling and posturing between these two countries. In terms of how we need to actually look at this is in a larger bioregional, how sediment flows are looked at, how it also is placed in a seismic zone. The 1950 earthquake is still fresh in memories of many people who still are there in this region. And it has actually transformed the entire landscape, the 1950 earthquake. And the dams that are being planned by China and India, the epicenter of the 1950 earthquake, which is one of the largest earthquakes in this region, the epicenter squarely falls between those two dams. And these kind of big projects, also the whole scalability of dams is also increased in the Himalayan region. Earlier, when we were talking about 405 megawatt dams, it was also seen as very big in the early 2000s. Like the Ranganadi Dam, when it came, it was only 405 megawatt dams, and it still was opposed as a big dam. But now, when the narrative has gone into 60 gigawatts and 11,000 megawatts, these dams dwarf, kind of are seen as dwarfs. But even 2,000 megawatt dam that was at the Subansiri Lower Dam, as you can see here, the Subansiri Lower Dam was 2,000 megawatts, and a sustained protest from 2008 onwards till now. The dam has not been still commissioned. There are examples of dams such as the Jangmu Dam, which is on the Yalung Sangpo upstream of the Great Bend, which has already been commissioned. And India always maintains a position that we are monitoring all developments on the other side, and we will safeguard the interest of the downstream countries. And many questions have been asked in the parliament. The answers have come from the Minister of External Affairs, and saying that, we are monitoring, we have an expert level mechanism since 2006, which has the provision of discussing transboundary rivers and infrastructure being developed on those rivers, and also the memorandum of understandings on river water sharing being another aspect of the India-China cooperation, which has been at abeyance since the Doklam dispute came up. But there has been also talks when the foreign secretary had visited China recently, had also pointed out that we need to actually put that back into motion. But there have been also researchers who also have been saying very clearly that the India-China Memorandum of Understanding on river data transfer, the hydrological data sharing, is also flawed in the sense that the data centers that are actually collecting this such data in the range shadow area are actually disseminating the data downstream, which actually gives a very, very false impression of that the flow from China is not so important for the Brahmaputra Basin downstream. There is a very, very peculiar situation where the Assam Chief Minister is saying that we do not care if China builds the dam upstream, while the Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister is keep on saying that it will actually affect the security and sanctity of rivers downstream in Arunachal Pradesh. So there are two different chief ministers, one Assam and Arunachal Pradesh, saying completely two different things. And the whole kind of speculation that is going on around these dams. One more thing that needs to be pointed out here is that the amount of advancement in technology that China is actually trying to employ in the Medoc Dam is also quite ahead of what India is actually at the stage of the Siang Upper Multipurpose Dam. Siang Upper Multipurpose Dam is only at a pre-feasibility studies stage. For many, many years, it was talked about as a possible counter to the China Dam at the Great Bend, which was something of a speculation. But India has not been able to do anything on the ground in the meantime. There is no proper data collection mechanisms. The Brahmaputra River Basin has not been allocated so much of research funds to actually study it in a proper scientific manner. Long-term data is missing, on the Indian side of the border itself, So in that sense, it does not really help alleviate the concerns of local people living in this region to actually see if such a big dam on the downstream of the Yalung Sangpo Gorge will be feasible or not. So we have actually missed the bus, so to say, in order to create a sustained research on the river, which the Brahmaputra Basin by itself is a very understudied river, more understudied than what is in the northeast of India than it is in Bangladesh. So Bangladesh has actually conducted more studies on the river system than what India has done in the northeastern part of the country. So this is a very major gap in order to also try to alleviate the fears. And no compensation can really alleviate the fears of people living in the center of a dam. But it's actually by providing very accurate scientific data, which India by itself has not collected. And when it is now going into collecting that feasibility studies, it is being met with opposition. For a long period of, from 2008 to around 2014, there was a period when there was a lot of protests against dams in Arunachal Pradesh, but then it slowly dissipated from 2014 to about 2023, 24. Many of the anti-dam activists actually started supporting dams in Arunachal Pradesh. And there was a complete overturn of the narrative. Dams were still being opposed by Assam, but in Arunachal Pradesh, the narrative was totally changed. But suddenly when this big dam came up, the Siang Upper Dam came up, many of these people who actually had stayed silent for this many years have now again come back and started the protest. So in this kind of, so the confidence building can only happen by sustained research on the river system, and also India does have the capability to do that and also monitor these developments in the river basin on a sustained basis, but it has failed to do so in the past. So that is where actually this is a picture of the Siang River, where almost 33 dams, 36 dams are being planned. 3 on the main channel. One is the Siang Upper Dam, the Siang Middle Dam, and the Siang Lower Dam. The Siang Lower started off much earlier and has not taken forward due to local opposition because the public hearings were not conducted in a proper manner, locals allege, and hence it has also taken quite a lot of time to actually progress on that. The middle dam is not being discussed as much, but the upper dam has now come into the picture in terms of as a response to the Medoc Dam. So, and the tributaries feeding into the Siang, the 33 other dams are going to be built in the tributaries of this river. So you can see the dams, the Siang here in the Upper Siang district, and on the many tributaries that you see that are feeding into the Siang, these other 33 dams were planned. The local communities do not also at the same time receive the same kind of resources, or their social infrastructure has not come up to that level, which also matches with the narrative of the physical infrastructure being deployed in the region. So a lot of these remote communities along the Siang Basin are still living without proper schools, hospitals. The border area development program that the Indian government has actually deployed in this region has not really reached into many of these areas and in a meaningful manner. Market access, for example, drinking water, sanitation, proper schools, access to health facilities. All of these have not really matched up to the amount of investment the Indian government is actually saying that it will do on big dams. So a lot of this protest is also coming in form of that kind of a resentment, that if you have so much money to actually put on big dams, why don't you have the money to actually improve our social infrastructure as well in a kind of a simultaneous scale, or not even a scale, but in a sense at a pace that actually matches the development of these dams as well. So for many years, this has been the story. Many smaller dams in the Dibang Basin, the Dibang dam also, the lower Dibang dam is also going on. It's in the very early stages of construction and not so much. The tunneling is happening. And many dams also in Bhutan, for example. India is also helping Bhutan to build many dams. And this is one river, which is the Punatangchu River, which also has a kind of a effects downstream in Assam, in India, and also in Bangladesh. So a lot of the dams that are also being built with Indian help in Bhutan are also seen as problematic, both by communities living in India itself as well as in Bhutan. And these have already created a lot of flash floods and drought-like situations in the lean season as well. A lot of infrastructure development has also happened as a consequence of this push for big dams in the region. One of these is the Bogibil Bridge and the Dhola Sadia Bridge, which were important connectors to actually access the remote areas where these dams are going to be built in the eastern Arunachal and the central Arunachal. Also, this has helped military preparedness along the border. And there have been many kind of these, these roads that are to carry heavy machinery that are required to build these big dams and all of that. So I would like to also point out this, that the infrastructural development in Northeast India has seen a very rapid infrastructural transformation, and particularly in Arunachal Pradesh, where connectivity has actually increased quite a lot into remote areas, which has also helped our defense preparedness vis-a-vis China. But also a lot of these big dams that are being built in this area is likely to actually also, is not only likely, but also already destroying this road infrastructure that is actually supplying a critical connectivity to the border regions. One is the example of the Raganadi Dam, 405 megawatt dam, which is actually regularly, annually washing away the main highway that connects from Lakhimpur to Dhemaji in Assam, and which is a very critical stretch which connects a lot of our armed forces to the border. So in that sense, there in the scenario in the future, a lot of these big dams will also not only, it has the potential to also not only impact local communities living in this region, but also our defense preparedness in the border regions. It can also be a double-edged kind of a sword for us. So in that sense, we also have to see how we sustainably can actually develop infrastructure in this region, and also communities, how local communities are taken into confidence and not get lost in the narratives of this larger geopolitics that is actually framing of this big dam versus big dam, and how a dam for a dam narrative is actually taking this region towards. A lot of tunneling is actually happening, which is also creating a lot of landslides in remote areas, and floods have increased in the Assam. This is a picture from Majuli, where floods are an annual recurrence, and the catastrophic, the floods over time has actually become more catastrophic. And in a sense, a lot of the monsoonal rain patterns has also shifted quite a lot. And this year, particularly, Northeast India has seen a lot less rainfall as in previous years, but rainfall in later months of the year at a very, very high rate. In a very small window, a heavy rainfall is happening, which is leading to flash floods. And another example is how the Chungthang dam collapse, which is also being noted with concern by many communities living in the Himalayan region. In 2023 October, that Chungthang dam had collapsed, and a lot of new technology that actually has come into hydropower generation, like the pump storage hydro, all of these alternatives are there to be taken, but many of these big dams are actually projected to be a larger kind of big concrete gravity dams, which also has a big reservoir and all of that. And both countries are actually extolling the benefits of these dams, that it will provide better river control, better sediment control, and it will make the region a lot more safer. But none of this actually seems convincing. It is actually also showing that it was going to actually meet our net zero emission goals, both in China and India, and all of that. Overall, saying this, that there is not only surface rivers, but also there are sky rivers, and there is also groundwater. A lot of the debate also needs to go along these different lines. And the mist is also very, very important, which actually is now being affected by a lot of these interventions. Many traditional farmers in this Himalayan region have actually traditionally used mist and fog in the winters to actually cultivate their crops. But this traditional knowledge of the river systems that they have overall is now becoming less meaningful in the face of rapid scaling up of infrastructural deployment in the region, which is also at the same time accelerated by connectivity infrastructure development in the region. What I would do, I'll try to stop here and maybe go into a discussion and take questions and answers, and maybe then more angles will open up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirza. A very interesting set of ideas. So, a couple of quick responses before we open the floor for questions. I think it's wonderful that you bring scale into the conversation, because it's I think it's a critical point, because I think different scales bring different meanings of the river in this particular case. And it's only when you invert, as it were, the research and policy case that you actually begin to see new ways of engaging with the river. Because when we look at from the national level, whether it's Beijing or Delhi, the Brahmaputra or the Sanko emerges as this quintessential metaphor of conflict, and it's highly securitized, masculinized, as you mentioned in your abstract. So when you invert the research and policy case, the river actually you open pathways, as it were, for new benefit sharing models to come. And we have this very wonderful example from the. You also, when you do that, you also look at the tributary of the Brahmaputra as a site of transboundary innovation. And you have this wonderful example of the India-Bhutan, on the India-Bhutan village, where villages have actually, they don't buy into this hyper-securitized narrative on the Brahmaputra, and have actually banded together to use social media networks to put in place early flood warning systems. So it's only, it isn't as though these imaginations do not exist. These are very much, when you look at it from the borderlands perspective or from the ground up, you actually get to see a great deal of dynamism happening, and new ways of engaging on old ways, and are there. So it's a very thickly populated sort of set of imaginaries about and a plural set. It helps us also recognize what has always been the truth, is that it helps us pluralize the imagination of the Brahmaputra. And I think we've talked of space and scale. I think when I listened to you, Mirza, it also occurred to me that it might also be useful to talk of time. Because when we look at these mega projects, they have long gestation periods. You don't get to see the benefits or the costs right away. The costs, definitely, you get to see a lot of it, but still, I think when we look at these mega projects, they result in what is called, quote unquote, delayed destruction. And that happens across time and space. And to borrow Rob Nixon's argument of how these represent, quote unquote, slow violence, because and that's, I think, to bring that literature in conversation with what you are looking at. It's that intersection which I think would be useful, because it gives us an additional valuable layer and a lens to look into to understand why all of this is happening and making sense of that. I think with that, let me open the floor for questions. So who would like to go first? I don't see any questions. I think people are still processing all that wealth of information you gave us, Mirza. So we'll just
I can just respond to you, maybe.
Yes, please. Yeah, let's. It's a great idea.
Yeah. In a sense, yeah, that is very, very interesting as to when you talk about benefit sharing models and the transboundary cooperation that is already there. How India, Bhutan with the DOM system of irrigation and how the flood early warning system is actually done by communities very proactively. And this predates the modern flood early warning systems which are being put in. But the whole irony of the fact is also now is that these kind of small, scale initiatives gets overwhelmed by the large scale of the interventions, like the Punatangsu project, for example. Once the Punatangsu project comes in, or the Magidetsu project comes in, then these projects will totally swamp this kind of, smaller models, where they also say that we will put in the early warning systems, but the same people who are actually pulling the early warning systems are also pulling the hazards in place. So in that sense, it's an irony that, you are at a simultaneous time, you are putting hazards in place, but also early warning systems. A very interesting thing that I actually did once when I was traveling from Bhutan's border at the Gelefu, where there is now a mindfulness city has been coming up. They are projecting a very big mindfulness city project, the Gelefu mindfulness city. From there, I had followed a truck carrying river boulders from Gelefu to down to Assam, and then entering Meghalaya, crossing the river in Assam, the bridge in Gwalpara, and crossing Meghalaya and going into Dalu border to sell those boulders into Bangladesh. So this transboundary, trade, this regional trade. So these river boulders that are being taken from the riverbed in Bhutan are being sold to Bangladesh to actually build an embankment to protect against flooding in Bangladesh. While the natural cushion that is there in upstream Bhutan, which would actually have prevented the flash flood, is being removed to actually transport it in a long way across India to sell it to Bangladesh to build an embankment to protect it from the same flood that will actually happen from upstream. And that is actually being refashioned as regional trade and development.
Yes.
So that is the whole,
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So that is the flaw
given. Sorry, Mirza, to jump in. It's been given that progressive sort of a sheen that it has been seen as a proactive measure suddenly. And so it's been window dressed in that sense.
Yeah, so in a way, it is so very connected. A lot of the interventions that we do upstream will have a downstream impact. And sometimes in the maze of this, all of this dressing up of, regional cooperation and transboundary cooperation and data sharing and all of that, we actually fail to recognize these things, that the futility of these things actually. That is one very good example of that. And also to how see time, as you said. The time is very important, not only in terms of a project time or kind of a time which looks at how much time a nation state has been there talking about dams in the modern times, but also a deep time. Deep time meaning, how rivers have shaped this landscape over deep time. And the deep time perspective is also very, very important. And a recent book by Australian researchers, which also talks about rivers of deep time, or rivers of Asian highlands, which looks at the Brahmaputra River Basin also, in addition to others, and also how monsoon cycles, frozen rivers, sky rivers, all of these narratives, the compensation that is actually being provided by to Tibetan communities, or also downstream in India to communities in Arunachal Pradesh, do communities have the scale and understanding of deep time? Even governments don't have the understanding of deep time, but do communities who are receiving that compensation have the understanding of deep time? Do they have the intergenerational understanding even to actually talk about how the effects of these big dams will have on the next generation? A lot of the elder people that I speak in the Siang River Basin actually say that we have lived our lives and now let the young people enjoy the benefits of these big dams, that this progress and development that these big dams will bring. So hence we are not opposing them, or we are taking a backseat. And this was not after the Medoc Dam was announced, but it was before that, in the interregnum, when the protests had actually simmered down quite a lot. But then there is, again, as I said, that there's no scientific research to back up a lot of the time that we actually had during that interregnum period, where India could have actually done a lot of resources into studying the system and actually assuaging the concerns of the people, that, you know, these are the things that it will affect or not affect, and have a comprehensive, you know, assessment of downstream impacts that Assam is actually talking about. And deep time is so very, very important. And I agree with you about the delayed destruction and the slow disasters. There's a book by Mitul Barua from Asoka. He talks about erosion as slow disasters. And the erosion in Majuli, in Assam, is rapidly increasing because of a lot of interventions that are happening in upstream of the river, backflow of the river. A lot of different dynamics are there, which are unknown, unseen. Even many communities have not seen a big dam in their lives, but are out in the streets to protest against them. And that also is something that in modern India we have to also factor in into the conversation. Thank you.
So Mirza, we have 3 questions. Let me begin with the, take them as they came in. So we have a question by Madhavi. If you can read that. Thank you for this very enlightening talk. You mentioned that India is a middle riparian state in this case. Could adopt a more responsible position? Could you elaborate on this? Would you like to take one at a time, Mirza?
We can do one at a time also.
Yes, whatever.
Yeah, thank you, Madhavi. This thing is also very, very important. India, in the riparian position, is at the middle riparian kind of a position, in contrast to China upstream, Bhutan being upstream, as well Bangladesh being downstream. And in that sense, India always has been saying that, we have been like China is behaving in a hegemonic manner by building dams upstream, and so we have the right to build dams downstream as well in Arunachal Pradesh. But we are forgetting that the downstream also is there, Bangladesh, which will be doubly impacted. Already a lot of the salination increase in the Sundarbans is increasing, and the sea water inflow into the Sundarbans is increasing day by day. And that is also leading to a lot of out-migration from that area. So in that sense, a lot of these policies that you cannot have a different yardstick, internationally speaking, about China doing constructing big dams, but you at the same time are building dams which are going to affect Bangladesh. We have a kind of a treaty arrangement with Bangladesh on the Farakka, on the Ganges water sharing, but time and again we have been also trying to say that the Farakka is going to be renewed in 2026, but there's still no progress in the talks. Tista is a kind of a sore point also. But what I say that a more riparian responsible position is by actually setting a precedent, a riparian precedent for the entire region to follow. India is in a very good position to do that. And hence, India could actually stop mirroring China and imitating China and go only for this dam for them kind of a narrative, instead of trying to build institutions, as Nimi was saying. A weak institutionalism is a major factor of problems in this river basin, and a more devotion of resources to not to big dams but to research on the river, and also to institution building on the river. That is something that India can take a lead on.
Thank you, Mirza. So there's a question from Rapai. He asks, how are we monitoring the changes in annual rainfall and snowfall conditions? How are the interests of the local communities taken care of?
Yeah, so there are, like in the traditional terms, on the ground based monitoring, rainfall monitoring systems were in place. Maybe before the 70s, 80s, there were data, but not in a digital format. There was data collected on the ground, and very intricate data was collected. But in the meanwhile, in today's times, such data, even if they're collected in a digital format, is not available for local communities to access to. The access to data is very, very important because a lot of the narrative in Northeast India is that we should not live in speculation of something that actually our livelihoods are very closely connected to. The river is something that we are very closely connected to, our livelihoods are very closely connected to, and communities living by the river have a right to actually know what is actually happening on the river and have a right to data on the river. This data secrecy that is actually around transboundary rivers, which are seen as kind of national sovereignty markers and projects of national importance, and this kind of a militarization of the narrative of river development is actually creating a lot of problems. We know that India has the capability to use satellite imagery, predict early warning through ISRO and all of that. But the common public, forget the common public, even researchers at IIT Guwahati do not have access to data properly. To actually, when I was in IIT Guwahati, I did not have access to data to actually do my research thesis, and I had to struggle quite a lot. So there is a lot of red tapeism in access to data. Local communities have are far away from the data, and access to data is an important thing which needs to be taken care of. And Sumthang dam collapse is a classic example of how communities were always saying that this is a traditionally known place for such, glacial lake outburst floods happening. And at the very point, they actually built a dam, and that got washed away. So it was not that the communities had not forewarned, So, but then there is community data through oral histories, but then also modern data that is collected but not disseminated or not shared.
Thank you, Mirza. There's a long question by a research scholar, from a doctoral scholar, Rishabh from Jamia. Would you like to read it, or would you like me to read it out?
I'm reading it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In context of the India-Bangladesh River Agreement, which is up for negotiation from next year when it expires, on one hand, the Bangladeshi security dilemma cannot be dismissed after New Delhi's unilateral abrogation of the Indus Water Treaty to Pakistan, for example. Okay, but so how will New Delhi's irresponsible behavior in context of Pak shape Bangladesh's position on the treaty? Second, how will it shape China's position vis-a-vis India? And again, how it will affect relations with Bangladesh, since India is a middle reference state. Yeah, so I would say that Bangladesh does not really have to wait for the what India did on the Indus Water Treaty. It has a ready kind of experience on the Teesta water negotiations that has been intractable for the past many years. Through several rounds of talks and all of that, it has remained intractable, and it definitely shows the way as to how the Farakka is also headed towards. There is a lack of trust, and also the whole thing of mixing river basins is something that is resisted by Bangladesh. And with the regime change in Bangladesh now, and it getting closer to China, and also a lot of Chinese investments in downstream Bangladesh, Bangladesh is squarely bandwagoning with China on the riverfront, because it also doesn't have any other option rather given the present political circumstances and also the geopolitical circumstances. In that sense, I would say it is really a lot of time already has passed by, and it is already too late to even begin in right earnest to even talk about the renewal of the Farak treaty or come to a close on the TISTA negotiations. And I think Nimi would also be able to share more light on this maybe.
Thank you. So Poonam also had a question on the dam for dam, but she says she thinks you've answered it adequately. And she thanks you for your response. So any other questions? So then let's see if we have another round two. Meanwhile, so when all is said and done, how do we then change the narrative of the Brahmaputra? Of course we know we have several answers as scholars, or there's a corpus of excellent work and communities of practice, like on Saral Banga on the India-Bhutan border, give us a set of innovative experience practices. But it's such a fast-moving landscape, and as you said, new projects will kind of elbow out some of these. But then I am not entirely pessimistic. The new meanings, new forms of engagement will come. So I think a good place to start, when I listen to you and my own understanding in my research, tells me a good place to start would be at the basin or sub-basin level, because that really opens the space for a set of riparian stakeholders to enter. Because otherwise you have this Delhi-Beijing sort of conversation. Central Water Commission and the Bureau of Hydrology, they discuss over the heads of the border regions, as it were. And so you have this very bizarre sort of, set of a situation where the border regions, who are the first line of defense, the first who take the first front of any of these environmental goods and bads, are not in any way part of the conversation. And the interesting thing here I'd like to just mention, you might have heard me mention this before, Mirza, in many of the panels we've been together, is that it isn't as though this is the only imagination, and it isn't as though the other transboundary rivers all have one single sort of one dominant single understanding of the river in their respective river basins. And when you and this is the other thing that really stood out for me when I look at the literature, is that beyond the high table, there's this potential to link actors and agendas. And an interesting example that is always animated, that really I absolutely think is spot on here, is from Southern Africa. And it's this initiative called Every River Has Its Own People. And it's interestingly a basin-wide international forum, and to which rural communities in Angola, Namibia, and Botswana send representatives. So these are not esoteric sort of ideas to when we talk about inverting the policy and research case, or the need to bring the subnational into this. These are the cross-cutting issues, cross-cutting challenges. And as you said, an issue that a problem or an issue that is upstream has ripple effects as it courses down the middle and the upper and the down, the lower riparian. So I think this is the irony at the heart of it all, that when we talk about development and a whole set of resource interventions and damage control measures which have this progressive sheen, that what happens to the river itself is very often that's hiding in plain sight, whether it's the Indus or the Brahmaputra.
Yeah, I think very well said. But just now, the 100th birth anniversary of Bhupen Hazarika was celebrated in Assam, and he had composed many tribute songs to the Brahmaputra, and some of them are very famous as well. And there was a time when people used to write songs about the river. Now no longer. Because of the destruction and the devastation that rivers have brought, because of the interventions that have been at a different scale altogether. Earlier, the Brahmaputra was also seen as a moody, majestic river and all of that. But nowadays, the nation states, when they talk about rivers, they talk about it as taps that can be opened and closed at will. Kind of, like we can divert rivers, we can close rivers, we can turn your taps dry. All of these, rivers are being very, very rudimentary terms, reduced to only taps. So this kind of a understanding within the nation state container that we can actually seal off a river is very, very idiotic, to say the least. In a sense, and this comes from this control mindset, this hubris of the hydrocracies that actually can think that they can actually make a new line of riparian control across the India-China border. What I feel that in the sense that we need to actually have an alternative framing, and the alternative framing is there before in terms of ecoregionalism, bioregionalism, talking about community to community, so like what we talk about India and Bhutan. There are many examples between Bangladesh and India, and many examples between Tibetan communities living in Arunachal Pradesh and Myanmar in India, and different parts of there. So in this bioregional kind of a thinking and understanding has to develop in order to actually see this as a interconnected space. And I wrote an article for the Institute of Chinese Studies earlier, which was titled River Regionalism. We talk a lot about economic regionalism and all of that, sub-regionalism, but you also have to talk about river regionalism, and as rivers as an entry point into discussions on regionalism and sub-regionalism. And that could be also some of the alternative framings that we actually can see and get cooperation, ahead, and getting communities, people to people connects. And many people have many stories to share between India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and China about rivers and stories about rivers. But these are fast dissipating in the narrative of this, a dam for a dam narrative, a tap for a tap narrative. And I close down the river in Indus in the Pakistan, and China says that we will also have a stranglehold over the Brahmaputra, the Great Bend. So in that sense, this signaling is not doing us any good. And then that can lead to catastrophic events in a very highly seismic zone as well. And I think that's these alternative framings should be also given more, and a deep time perspective also, as I said earlier, needs to be brought into the foreground. What examples from the transboundary, Madhavi, somebody had written another question here, talking about any examples where complex transboundary riparian issues are being successfully handled. One of the examples I could actually say is the Lower Mekong Basin, where Lower Mekong Basin has been able to do a long-term sustained research on rivers and being able to actually build confidence amongst communities and backed by proper science and also the interweaving of community traditional knowledge systems. So in that sense, that is an example that we cannot understand rivers overnight. A pre-feasibility study or feasibility study after China announces a dam in December 2024, now will not take us anywhere close to actually building a robust dam at the Siang Upper site, because these things cannot be done overnight and in a fast-paced manner. These things need a lot of a long duty understanding of river systems and a long duty collection of data and an analysis of data in order to actually be able to put in that kind of resources to build such a dam, which actually is about $13.2 billion, which is not a joke, that the Siang Upper will cost, so, and that is only projected to be cost at today's times, and as we know, as projects go on in the horizon, this cost will inflate tremendously.
So if I could just add to what you said in response to Madhavi's I think, Madhavi, there's also, again, on the lower Mekong, there are a few what one can broadly see as shifts in China's public diplomacy. We can, cynically, if you were to look at it, you can say this amount to, depending on how you look at it, it could amount to something, and it could be dismissed as amounting to virtually nothing. But for whatever it's worth, what they have done, for instance, is, and this is the thing that really is the absolutely something that really is worth highlighting, where the Chinese state, government, as well as companies included, have found it in their interest, because precisely because these are big signature projects where billions have been invested. And the Mitsone next door in Myanmar, where they burnt their fingers, and it's the $3.7 billion 6,000 megawatt project, which got suspended and continues to remain in suspension because you have this absolutely brilliant banding between the Kachins and the Bamars, who come together to argue that they reframe the discourse around the Mitsone and call rebrand the whole struggle around the Irrawaddy as a national treasure. So that brings these two otherwise contending sort of communities to come together, band together successfully, and then the government of the day decides to suspend it. So from there, the takeaway for China is that they need to listen to to local sentiment. It's not just enough to sign agreements at the national levels. So what they then did was to institutionalize social safeguard norms, even when many of these national MOUs or national environmental agreements do not have any need for them to be doing it. So some of these, so they began that in Mekong. So and also I think in Vietnam, I'm not sure. In particular in Vietnam, I think, and Myanmar. And the other is they took officials of the MRC, the Mekong River Commission, to site visits, to dam site visits, something which they haven't conceded to us despite our requests. And the third is this sharing of dry season flows. These are over the course of a few years, these are the kind of measures where Chinese public diplomacy was seen as responsive to public sentiment in lower Mekong. That's what comes to mind. So Mirza, there's a follow-up question from Rapai. He asked, is there any interaction between the local communities and our border defense agencies or local police forces?
Yes, there is a lot of close interaction between, and each one is dependent on the other in many ways. But then there is also a disparity in terms of how resources are allocated. A flash flood in a remote area in Arunachal Pradesh can take away a village, and at the same time a military post. but the money for the military post will come within a month to rebuild, but the money for that village will come in years. So in that sense, I would say that the climate risk as it is framed in the Himalayas, it is actually being framed as the from a very, very militarized security point of view, from a very statist point of view. I was in a kind of a task force on climate risk in the Himalayas, and there was a kind of a scenario where actually they said that an Air Force base is washed away by a big flash flood or a dam break or something, you know. And I'm sure there was someone who actually said that, you know, I'm sure that we will be able to build back something within a month. But would the communities be able to build back from the same risk that this kind of intervention poses to their community life in a month, or be able to hope to be able to access that kind of resources? We already been seeing in Uttarakhand and Himachal as to the devastating cloudbursts and flash floods that we've been seeing. And a lot of these communities will take years to actually come back, even be able to get back on their feet, you know, in terms of economic, resilience. So in that sense, I feel that, even if there is a kind of interaction and all of that, it is very, very skewed in resource allocation, access, a lot of these kind of things. And also military movement will definitely be affected by calamities, but it has a response time is quick for them, but not for communities. And that is also what is there. And to look at bioregionalism and ecoregionalism, the stepping stones could be river regionalism, could be more research, and also in emphasis on multilateralism at least. India has always been a staunch bilateralist in its river relations, in its neighboring countries, with Nepal, for example, with Bangladesh, with Pakistan, and also with others. But we also need a kind of a multilateral kind of a intent also to begin with. China has started showing some multilateral intent on the Mekong River Basin, although it is also doing a lot of forum shopping as well. But some multilateral intent is being shown on the Mekong Basin. We need to also bring that kind of narrative into the picture at some point. This kind of a multilateral, staunch bilateralist attitude on rivers may not be able to take us anywhere, but a kind of a regionally appraised kind of a multilateralism can also work. With Bhutan, we have some significant gains. With Bangladesh, we had significant gains, but the changing political situation has actually also brought about different combinations in the Bangladesh scene. Yeah, but we are still hopeful that these things will pan out positively in the future. Yeah.
Mirza, do you also see any scope for minilateralism?
Yeah.
Because as a response, we have seen across. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think in the past, there has been direct outreach also in terms of how subnational units have actually taken part in discussions with Bangladesh. Assam has taken discussions with Bangladesh. Arunachal Pradesh has held consultations with Bangladesh. Assam has held consultations with Bhutan, for example. With Nagaland also, there was a dialogue with Nagaland, Meghalaya. So separately, Bangladesh has been actually engaging with subnational units within India as well. I think there is a scope for that. Civil society actors also on, for example, the Hilsa fish, sustainability of the Hilsa farming itself is a very good example of how in Assam and Bangladesh have been cooperating. And not only the entire state government of Assam, only small communities along the border who actually have come up to a consensus that you will not fish during a particular season, and the Hilsa swim upriver to spawn, and if it's not allowed to be spawned at that point of time, and if it is overfishing in Assam, then there will be not a bumper crop harvest in the season. So the Bangladeshi villagers actually promised the Assamese villagers, saying that we will sell you at a reduced cost when the Hilsa has finished its spawning. And that itself is a very classic example of a very small kind of cooperation across boundaries. So those kind of things can be expanded, built upon. But the overall speculation that these kind of big ticket projects bring about is of doing no good to anyone in the region. So I feel that this speculation and data secrecy, a lot of these things, rivers are being securitized. So we need a desecuritization of the narrative. A long, painful, painstaking process is carried on with, for examples like the Brahmaputra dialogue happened, and many other subnational unilateral initiatives are happening at various points. Suddenly, one event like Doklam happens, and suddenly everything goes down. So a desecuritization of the narrative also would help in a big way. We have to keep these two tracks, be able to keep these two tracks separately, because a lot of scientific collaboration, university professors, scientists getting together, geologists getting together. This is a very hard task to bring them together at the initial level. But once they go away, again, to bring it back, again, it becomes very difficult, especially at the
Thank
basin
you.
level.
Rapai, do you want to?
No, just I wanted to thank Mr. for one thing, and to say that he narrated the experience of the Air Force, this thing. But I think what we are lacking, or he is on the border, he travels more now. The local administration, it means the problem is again, when I am talking of Siang or those regions, the district headquarters may be kilometers away or miles away. But I think in the natural calamities, or in the even when there is a rainfall increase, the local administration and the concerned security agencies, there must be a mechanism to cooperate and coordinate. Otherwise, I think this talk about local communities, NGOs, that will not work. So I think as you are traveling and you are looking at, it will be interesting if you can connect with the local administration, who is the collector or the deputy collector in charge of the area. And the thing is, for the army, I know many of the time the problem is getting back to Delhi and then getting an order, but that can be sorted out in the local senior officers. This is just for your suggestion, as you are working closely in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree. There are many gaps in the kind of communication systems. Also, when the Northeastern Space Application Center in Meghalaya sends its flood early warning to district commissioners to Assam, first to Dispur, and from Dispur it goes into district commissioners in different districts, affected districts, and from the district commissioners to go down to the local subdivision it gets delayed and the disaster already strikes. So there are certain gaps which needs to be filled, and there is work going on in filling up those gaps. The Ranganadi Dam project, 405 megawatt, it is traditionally creating a lot of floods downstream. So the lower Subansiri DC, district commissioner, the Lakhimpur deputy commissioner, and the Dhemaji deputy commissioner, these three have a coordination committee to actually talk about how to manage during release from the dam. So the release from the dam, there is a flood early warning system in place, but it usually, by the time this message reaches the villages which are going to be affected, the flood has already come. So in that sense, these are learnings from the ground, but these are also known to the government, and the government is trying to actually work on these things. And there are certain improvements which are also done, where now relief camps in floods in Assam also have separate quarters for separate facilities for women, separate facilities for child care, and all of that. So things are improving with the certain bureaucrats who have showed interest in this kind of best practices from around the world.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mirza. I think that when you talk in terms of knowledge systems, the two, which is the traditional knowledge or the knowledge from the ground, are and whether we look at the more formal or the are not really. It's not a question of either or. They are like the two are mutually constitutive, and the two can coexist. And they reinforce incidentally these local adaptations or innovations or communities of practice go on to actually enhance and strengthen state capacity to respond to many of these. So in that sense, it's a very false binary to think that these are really at loggerheads. It's not. So the only question is to, as you said, to scale it up or to bring, these in find, bring these in conversation with each other, provide some platforms where they can find, like the Southern Africa example shows, that it can easily, an institutional format can be thought of. Everybody could kind of be a sort of mutually beneficial sort of prospect. It doesn't undercut, one doesn't undercut the other. Madhavi, would you like to comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I was just saying that this, thinking that this, bioregional approach or river regional approach that you're talking of, Mirza, that where it could be successfully applied would be within the country, for instance, right? Like there are different, there are rivers that flow through different states within India, and we're not talking of crossing state boundaries and things like that. But still, it's very hard to get agreement on how to, like I live in Karnataka, and there's this constant, thing over the Kaveri river with Tamil Nadu, and I mean, it seems stuck in the same kind of politics. I am the upper, you are the lower, and so I mean, it's apart from cross-border and trans-border, even within the country, we need to apply this kind of approach, right? That's what I was just thinking. It's more like a thought rather than.
Yeah. There's a lot of different bioregions which are traditionally seen as within the India is such a big country that a lot of bioregions situate within the country itself, like the desert bioregion. Also, some of it extends to Pakistan, but also like in that sense, the Hilsa by itself, the spawning of the Hilsa, for example, itself is a transboundary bioregion in a sense. The Himalayas, the eastern Himalayan bioregion could be one, which also transcends Bhutan, Arunachal Pradesh, and Tibet. So in that sense, a lot of the sacred landscapes that Nimi was also part of earlier, the Kailash Sacred Landscape Conservation, and also the Myanmar, India, China Tri-Junction, there are also the snow leopard habitat as well, or could be considered as a bioregion in a sense. So these are kind of interesting entry points towards be able to actually bring together communities who are divided by nation state borders as well as in domestic borders, to bring them to again start discussing, dialoguing on these issues. Because the nation state border sometimes gets firmly etched in our mind and say that almost it becomes natural border. And while it was not the natural border was the rivers and the mountains and the streams and the valleys. But sometimes the nation state borders or the state borders that Assam, Nagaland, and all of that becomes so hard in our minds that it almost becomes natural. It seems natural, which are not actually.
Thank you.
I think, Madhavi, my 2 cents would be that at the end of the day, when you look at why this dilemma or this lament that all like you, we would also share, is that why we think we are in the same, we are at a standstill and nothing, the discourse doesn't seem to be moving. In fact, it's regressing. It is actually a worrisome, but it's actually the right reading. And the reason for this is because fundamentally securitization, because all of this, whether it's Karnataka, whichever scale you look at, whether it's Karnataka or the Brahmaputra at the at the basin level, the language of this in which this is couched or framed is a language of securitization, and securitization fundamentally is a theory of elite politics. So why would state elites who are in the business of securitization be persuaded to alter behavior? So that's the fundamental, where will the incentives come from? And one small, shared an illustrative example is for instance, in Southeast Asia, how China, now both the government and the companies who have sunk in billions, now saw it in their interest to institutionalize social safeguard norms for whatever it's worth. So nobody is arguing that this is a same level playing field. It's huge asymmetry involved, and given all of that, can we do anything to shine a light on a set of actors, issues that are missing from the research and policy imaginations? And so some of that, I think, is what we, that's the tricky bit, which is why it's not, there are no easy kind of answers. Would you like to
and
add?
also the culture, cultural bioregionism also. Culture plays a very important part. So I think food cultures is an important part in terms of how the hillside has been incorporated on. The food culture it's a matter of identity also for transboundary communities. Yes,
but Mirza, my 2 cents again would be you weaponize that culture, you weaponize that development. So you create, because I as a if I am a politician, whatever scale I am at, I would find it in my interest to kind of speak that a different to weaponize it. So some of that create these kind of gridlocks. So how do we then get around those? So which is the problem that we are which is why we began with the problematizing the kind of flawed frames that we work with.
And the bureaucratic gridlocks as well,
yes,
within the hydrocracy,
Yes. So are there any more? There's one. What's this? We need to wrap up within 10 minutes. Otherwise, and hand over to Supradeep. So Mirza, thank you very much. I think let me formally, on behalf of all of us, thank you, Mirza. And it's been an absolute pleasure to convene this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. With this, we come to an end of today's seminar. We thank Dr. Mirza Zulfiqur Rahman and Professor Nimi Kurian for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. We also thank the audience for joining us today and raising their question regarding the topic. We would like to invite you to the upcoming Wednesday seminar. Further information regarding the event can be found on the ISS website, or else you may also subscribe to our regular newsletter for your updates. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.